All right, thank you, everyone. So for our second panel, this is the opportunity where we have students in discussion. So we're very excited and in discussion with our keynote speakers, Cruz Garcia, Natalie Frankowski from WAI Think Tank, which we're very, very excited to have them here. I know we're setting things up a little bit. I'm going to introduce Marcel Sanchez Prieto. He is an architect, co-founder of CRO Studio, and associate professor at the University of San Diego. He received his B.Arch from Iberoamericana, Universidad Iberoamericana, and he studied in Mexico City and Tijuana, and an M.Arch from UCLA. And he's going to introduce our panel. Great, thank you.
So, I'm my partner Adriana Cuellar. She's part of my Crow Studio office. So thank you so much for being here. I'm gonna ask my colleagues, and I call them colleagues, students, because we are all students and we're colleagues. I'm gonna ask them to kind of pass, but I want to say that please welcome everybody. Thank you for being here, and it's really exciting to have many friends and students and colleagues in here. But I want to emphasize that this panel, for me, is one of the key panels, a very important panel, because in reality, all that we are doing throughout this year and in this day is about students. It's about how to help students and how to create a platform for students. And I think that in this regards, the reflection of the cross-border education in Israel Roundtable, what we're interested is in the voices of the students, those who are not only shaped by this educational system in our context, but also they are becoming the future architectural practice in this dynamic and very complex region. So the participation is essential because you are the ones who experience the challenges and opportunities of this firsthand. And I'm very, very interested to know your opinion. So we have Karen from Tecnológico de Tijuana.
Hi, thank you.
Coming in. Then we have Jesus Antonio from Escuela Libre de Arquitectura. Now we have Kobe Gordillo from University of San Diego. And we have Alexander, I don't know, Conja from New School of Architecture and Design. And of course, in today's discussion, I was considering we could address topics around the experience, the challenges, and hopes of students, as well as maybe, and I say maybe, how can we advocate for a more interconnected and supportive architectural education system? So we are also joined by Cruz Garcia and Natalie Frankowski of Y Think Tank, who bring a valuable perspective on education and advocacy from an international standpoint. We are excited to hear from you and look forward to our thought-provoking and collaborative conversation. I'm not going to expand in the introduction of both of you because I will do it later so they can know. Right? So we'll start. I will start with the first question, in a sense, a very simple question, somewhat of an introduction of yourself and a bit of your trajectory history, and how and why you are at the school you are representing. Where a little bit of your background and say why you chose and what led you to be at the school you are. Whoever wants to.
I'll start. My name's Alex. I'm currently a fourth year at New School of Architecture. I was originally an engineering major after leaving high school. And when COVID hit, I knew I had some time to figure out something different because I wasn't a fan of what I was doing and studying. So I had a full 2 years to really think about what it is that I wanted to do. And I knew I wanted to do something more creative. And I met somebody in the master's program at New School. And talking to them more made me realize that architecture would be a really good move. And once I saw that New School was offering in-person classes again after COVID had ended, I enrolled, and it's been a good journey so far. And yeah, really happy I met that person.
I can go next. Hello, my name is Kobe Gordillo. I was born in Mexico City, but my family moved here when I was really little. So I did all my education in San Diego. Right now, I'm in the University of San Diego. I'm majoring in architecture and minoring in Chinese and visual arts. And I chose USD because of its liberal arts program. Specifically, I knew it had the flexibility, the schedule had the flexibility to allow me to proceed with architecture and also be able to do Chinese and visual arts. What I really like about it is that I get to be in classrooms with people from different minors, and that allows me to see problems not only through the lens of architecture, but through other lenses. And yeah, in order to come up with a solution.
Okay, my name is Karen. I'm from Tijuana. I'm gonna speak in Spanish to do it a little different. And hola, mi nombre es Karen Godínez. Soy originaria de la ciudad de Tijuana. Actualmente estoy cursando el 7º semestre de universidad y para mí siempre ha sido un interés pues dibujar, como creo que muchos de nosotros compartimos esa pasión y creo que a partir de arquitectura pude desarrollar este lenguaje no solamente pues para expresar mis ideas, sino también para entender las ideas de los demás. Y la verdad que participar como miembro de ATEA, ha sido una oportunidad para, pues, no solamente conocer más personas y ampliar nuestros horizontes culturales, sino también para inspirar a jóvenes como ustedes, para que se animen a participar en organizaciones como estas, ¿no? Y poder resolver, perdón, los problemas que pues vemos en nuestra comunidad muchas veces.
I don't know if I'm gonna because we don't want to kind of make it so long, so I'm just gonna leave it in Spanish. It's gonna be like English and Spanish. I will not try to translate every moment, so sorry about that, because otherwise it will be so long and it's gonna be just so you understand more of it. Yeah.
Hola, mi nombre es Antonio Morales. Yo también nací en la Ciudad de México y estudié música en la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. Toco el violonchelo y esa fue mi primer licenciatura, ¿no? Dediqué mucho tiempo al estudio y a la práctica de la música contemporánea, el violonchelo, la música clásica, y después me especialicé un poco en música antigua. Durante todo ese tiempo, en ese quehacer de la música y quehacer universitario, la música, conocí a un doctor, el doctor Julio Estrada, donde entré a su cátedra y en esa cátedra me presentó a un compositor que me rompió la cabeza, Yanis Xenakis. Yanis Xenakis había trabajado con Le Corbusier y para mí ese momento fue un parteaguas. Aparte, mis padres son arquitectos y yo me había negado como al estudio de la arquitectura. Pero ese conjunto de situaciones, como lo de haber conocido a Julio Estrada, lo de que me presentara su trabajo de Yanis Xenakis, en aquel momento mi padre había comenzado una obra del arquitecto japonés Tadao Ando. Entonces, todo eso se conjugó y de pronto me vi inmerso en la arquitectura también. O sea, de a poco fui como introduciéndome ahí y me di cuenta que necesitaba y quería estudiar arquitectura. Buscando en el país y en otros países, de pronto encontré a la Escuela Libre de Arquitectura que ofrecía un programa muy distinto a las escuelas a las que yo tenía proximidad. Y en el 2022 decidí viajar y mudarme a Tijuana para comenzar mis estudios formalmente en la Escuela Libre.
Muchas gracias. Thank you. Gracias. I'm gonna do the same, Natalie and, and Cruz. I'm gonna ask you why you chose and where do you study, right? The same question.
My story is a bit funny. I'm from another border in the Atlantic. I come from Puerto Rico, and I never met an architect in my life before going to school, right? Because that's not something that in my neighborhoods we don't know architects. I knew engineers, so I thought I wanted to be an engineer. And I always tell this a funny anecdote that there was a broken elevator I was supposed to go to the engineering university to run track in college, and the elevator was broken, and my classmate that was going also to the track team said, we're not going to climb 10 levels after practice. So I switched to the university that was near my home, and they told me that they didn't have engineering. They only can offer architecture. And I was like, sounds similar to engineering to me. And I thought I wanted to be a designer and I deal with society and so on. And I think I wanted to be an architect, but I never met such a character or such a profession. I think I made the good choice because of that broken elevator. But there was a very small chance that I would be an electrical engineer today. And I don't know what I would be doing really, because maybe I would have been trapped in the discipline, or maybe I'll be making a lot of money, or I don't know, which is not the case now.
Yeah, we always think that if one day Cruz will write a book about why he studied architecture, it should be called The Broken Elevator, because it's like a really iconic title. So I'm sorry, for me, it's less iconic. I would say even more traditional in a way, because I think like architecture was in my family somehow. I had like a great grand uncle who was an architect in Poland, and somehow my grandfather wanted my dad to become an architect. It didn't work. My dad was like much more like into like art and doing his own thing. So
he's an unprofessional architect.
Yeah, he still has traits of architect. But then so it was also something that was like, I had a lot of books around me about architecture and so on. So I think very early on, I was like, I thought I would study architecture, but like a very interesting turning point happened more after in my studies. So I studied in France in two different schools. One was in Saint-Etienne, and then I graduated from Paris-La Villette. And suddenly in Paris-La Villette, I had the opportunity to be learning architecture through philosophy, through art, through filmmaking, through activists, and all the different like passions or interests that I had in life finally came together. And I thought, okay, that was a revelation for me, because I never saw myself as doing, just design per se, because I was like, also like I had all this, if it's anger or all this like different energy that I wanted that would lead me to do like very different types of output that were just not the ones that I would see at that time in architecture, like working with movie, working with idea of fiction, but also like addressing a lot of political issue and so on. And so being in that moment, in that school, in that program, really made everything come together for me. So it was very relevant for.
It's a program that came from May 68, basically. It's like those schools were founded after revolution in a way. So it makes sense that it was politically young. This is Emma, so she will be around today.
Welcome, Emma. Welcome. Welcome to So I think that what you said is interesting, because I think it leads to the next concern or question about what was the experience, in the sense of what was your experience navigating to architecture school, and what is it that you, in the process you're going through right now, the education, the experience of education, but also in the relationship of the broader context, right? Because we want to always tie it up in the sense of that experience. Did it have any relation? Did it have an impact? Did you were always considering what is the Latin relationship that you have in that experience of your education, separately or in context of this border region?
So for me, I wasn't 100% sure I wanted to do architecture. That's also one of the things that appealed to me about USC. I had the opportunity to be there 2 years, figure out what I wanted to do, and then declare a major. I ended up choosing architecture because, as I mentioned before, I grew up in San Diego, but I've constantly been crossing the border, whether it be to Tijuana, to Mexico City. And I would look at houses. I would look, especially in Mexico City, that's a city of so much contrast. And I'd be like, I want to build something. I want to make something that in those areas that are like poor and stuff, I want to find my way to like help those areas through architecture. So that's kind of what pulled me into architecture. And what's interesting is that even though I grew up in San Diego, I never, from elementary school to high school, there was never a connection to the border in my education. All the connections I had to the border were from my family, from me being born in Mexico. But other than that, in that education, there was no reference to TJ, to Mexico. The references and the actual connection to the border started when I started in USD. Specifically, I remember my first interaction with architecture and the border was in a studio class I took, where we were asked to design something in Tijuana. And for me, I thought, okay, well, I've been to Tijuana several times. This is easy. I know what Tijuana is like. I know what the community is like. But then I started thinking about the people in my class that had never been to TJ and that had never learned about those communities. So I guess it's making me think we need to find a way to connect those people to Tijuana, because in the end, it's a city that's right next to us and that we have a lot of opportunities between us.
Thank you so much. Somebody else?
Okay. Yo creo que mi experiencia en la carrera de arquitectura lo que me ha dejado es que no solamente tú puedes representar tus ideas en un plano, sino que también lo puedes ver. Arquitectura, pues es arte, como su palabra lo dice, pero también es arquitectura en 3D, ¿no? Es visualizar el arte en 3D que va más allá de solamente la estética, la funcionalidad. También creo que la arquitectura lo que me ha dejado en experiencia es aprender como acaban de decir, justamente como reunir todas esas pasiones que tienes, porque a veces mucha gente pues no sabes hacia dónde dirigirte, pero en arquitectura encuentras varios caminos.
Pero si yo te preguntarías, en esa experiencia que tú estás diciendo, I'm talking in Spanish now, so, ¿cómo ves tú cuando en tu experiencia, que como hablas del arte, de la arquitectura y la idea de creación, pero en tu educación, en tu institución, la idea de hablar de la frontera, de los temas de la frontera, de la condición de la frontera, ¿cómo crees tú y cuál ha sido o qué significado ha tenido en ti una cuestión de estar en este contexto?
Okay. Justo para allá iba un poco. Creo que como algunos saben o han tenido la oportunidad de ver, Tijuana se caracteriza mucho por ser una ciudad que te brinda oportunidades a todas las personas que vienen. Entonces creo que desde ahí empieza la cultura. Yo llevo toda mi vida viviendo en Tijuana, entonces creo que las personas que vivimos ahí son siempre, tienen una personalidad siempre de ayudar a otros, de ayudar a la sociedad. Entonces creo que eso caracteriza mucho en mi educación, que también como arquitectos pues queremos ayudar a la sociedad. Entonces creo que eso es algo que también veo en mis maestros y en mis compañeros. A través de la arquitectura tal vez no siempre podemos solucionar todo, pero tratamos de aportar y dar ese pequeño granito de arena, ¿no? En esta situación transfronteriza, en este caso.
So the architectural educational experience I've had at New School has been one where it's a very tight-knit community, especially with the professors. So I find that myself and many of the other students have a lot of conversations inside and outside of studio about architecture. And the professors at New School have a history of dealing with the border context. So even though I'm not Hispanic or Mexican myself, my family is actually from Iraq. But through my professors and through New School, I became involved in talking about issues related to the border region that while I was always aware of as being a part of San Diego and born in San Diego, never had a hand in directly. And through becoming closer with them, doing studio projects related to the border region, having these conversations, and then with Thai and ATEA starting up last year, there have been many events where myself and other students have been able to get involved and raise awareness about what's going on and see what the differences are by doing projects related to the border system.
Bueno, para mí ha sido una experiencia muy contrastante, ¿no? Desde llegar desde la Ciudad de México y estar solo en la frontera y de pronto ver el muro. Eso ya es imponente, creo que para todos los que por primera vez visitamos y no hemos estado en esta frontera. Cuando llegué, lo primero que pasó fue que llegué un viernes y el lunes ya estaba en la escuela libre. respecto a esa parte era como ver esa reja que se veía desde la azotea, ya era frío, ¿no? Todo para mí fue como un balde de agua fría y un cambio radical. La escuela me sorprendió mucho porque estando en una zona que siempre ha sido un punto rojo, ¿no? Y mencionado así, es como ese corazón, sí de Tijuana, pero que tiene pues esta connotación muy negativa, pues tenía miedo, ¿no? De aproximarme a ese lugar. Sin embargo, la escuela me fue abriendo otro panorama y otro contexto respecto a eso. También desde estar en un sistema educativo como el de la UNAM, que es la universidad como más, eh, como la principal universidad o de las principales universidades en México, que tenía un modelo educativo, un sistema y que a pesar de que yo venía como de la práctica artística, siempre era un sistema más tradicional, pero cuando llegué a la ELA, ya era un sistema como de talleres, ¿no? Un poco más libre, donde había interdisciplina y transdisciplina, y poco a poco me fui dando cuenta del significado de por qué esa escuela estaba en esa zona, ¿no? Para meternos en un contexto. Entonces, también de a poco la escuela me ha ido moldeando una nueva imagen mucho más abierta, y eso ha sido súper enriquecedor, ¿no? También esto de estar en una interacción en la frontera me ha hecho cuestionarme, pensar siempre todos estos discursos que tenemos en la frontera, tanto del lado mexicano como del lado estadounidense, ¿no? Se viene mucho en el discurso que se repite, es que Tijuana es una ciudad muy joven, muy joven, tiene 130, 150 años, no sé, pero me hace pensar, ¿en serio es tan joven? ¿No puede reflexionar sobre otras ciudades? ¿No? Tenemos del lado también a San Diego, y San Diego de pronto es como un poco una utopía para el lado mexicano, pero después viviendo un poco del lado de San Diego, o sea, es decir, como visitándolo tan seguido, conociendo a tanta gente, te das cuenta que también tiene otros problemas y que empiezas a interactuar. Entonces, reflexionábamos ayer por la noche con mi compañera Rumi, mi Rumi que está acá, como, ¿qué es esa cuestión sobre lo transfronterizo? ¿Existe o no? Y nos estamos dando cuenta, o sea, a veces existe, a veces no existe, pero me ha hecho cuestionarme, siempre cuestionarme. Creo que ha sido muy importante para mí estar en esa escuela que está en ese punto y que me ha permitido reflexionar sobre el quehacer en ese lugar en específico y no como en el caso que la UNAM me ofrecía en otro contexto, ¿no? En una escuela, dentro de una ciudad gigante, dentro de un punto en el que digo que es el chilangocentrismo, ¿no? Si conocerán esta cuestión como del el que nos llaman chilangos a los nacidos en Ciudad de México o gente de Ciudad de México, y que allá se piensa que todo lo que pasa en el país es lo que pasa en la Ciudad de México y quieren resolverlo todo desde la Ciudad de México. Y no, empiezas a darte cuenta de otras cosas acá, ¿no? Em, Ayer se hablaba en una de las pláticas sobre el transporte público, de cómo se soltaban algunas cifras, no sé qué, pero había cosas que yo veía aquí que no aplicaban, ¿no? Digamos, en el caso de Tijuana. Y eso ha sido como un poco la incidencia que ha tenido en mí la educación de esa escuela en específico.
Thank you. Is what I'm going to do it now. I think that you put a lot of points there that we forget that, yes, although very young, we have a history, right? And I think that I contradicted the idea that we are building that history, right? We're regenerating. There's a history in there. We need not to forget, and how we're really reflecting that history that we're building. So in that sense, what I'm trying to get now to the next observation is that what obstacles, right? Where in your education, or what obstacles that you, because sometimes you have accessibility. We talked about it yesterday. There's some students who have access, that don't access. What is this situation of the border, the context, in seeing this duality, and what is the notion of accessibility of education or not education, or other types of education is not inside of the school? For your reference.
No sé si alguno de ustedes ha visitado anteriormente el ITT, pero pues en mi experiencia lo que me pasa es como dirían, tal vez al estar separados por una línea fronteriza, sus problemas no se llegan a interlazar de cierta forma, pero por ejemplo, sales de la escuela a las 6 de la tarde, 5 de la tarde, y casualmente mi escuela está cerca de la línea por Otay y todo el tráfico de la zona industrial, pues te genera ahí tardar, en vez de hacer el traslado de tu casa en 30 minutos, terminas haciendo 2 horas atorado en el tráfico. Y pues quieran que no, salir de la escuela en esa experiencia es como que sales de la escuela, te enfrentas a horas de tráfico y luego todavía tienes que llegar a tu casa a hacer tu entrega del día siguiente. Entonces, esas problemáticas a veces nos llegan a unir como, pero no lo vemos como a simple vista. También quería mencionar que, por ejemplo, con estos eventos transfronterizos que hemos hecho de charets y visitas a New School o la Universidad de San Diego, pues tomamos pues nuestras medidas de transporte y tenemos la experiencia de poder ir en trolley y pues conocemos un poco el sistema de tráfico, de cómo funciona y darte cuenta que pues de ese lado de la frontera tienen mayor acceso a un mejor transporte, una mejor calidad de transporte y decir, ¿qué pasaría si yo tuvieras estas oportunidades en mi ciudad de tomar solamente un trolley que me deje afuera de mi escuela y no tomar 3 camiones para cargar mi reglaté, mi tubo, mi cartón, porque pues no cuento con un vehículo, ¿sabes? Te hace ver esas cosas que dices, ¿qué pasaría si mis compañeros tuvieran estas posibilidades? ¿Qué cambiaría en mi desarrollo académico?
Yo quisiera también intervenir un poco en eso de parte, como hay cuestiones que veo, nosotros ahorita estamos aquí y, pues, por ejemplo, cruzamos y estamos de este lado, pero tengo compañeros que, por ejemplo, no tienen visa y no cruzan. Eso ya tiene un límite y una merma, ¿no? Hacia el conocimiento y hacia la cultura, etcétera. También hay poco acceso a cuestiones culturales y eh, hay menos museos en Tijuana, hay menos bibliotecas, hay menos accesos como al conocimiento, ¿no? En general. Eso sí veo que es algo fuerte en Tijuana, ¿no? Que hace mucha falta.
Pero igual, porque veo algunos temas que me ponen nervioso. Cuando hablan de que Tijuana es una ciudad joven, ¿qué quiere decir?
Que es una ciudad joven, es que es una ciudad en relación a otras ciudades que es de 120 años de historia que tiene, ¿no?
¿Pero historia colonial o había gente ahí antes o habían
Exacto,
caracoles o cómo se mide?
exacto.
Porque me pone nervioso, ¿no? Cuando usamos como una rúbrica ahí bien eurocéntrica para contar historia y estamos hablando de exclusión, inclusión, y estamos contando que Tijuana tiene 130 años y me parece que eso es una historia ahí contada por europeos, ¿no? Y lo que me lleva de nuevo a la pregunta que comentabas, y lo que sé de Tijuana lo sé a través de una autora que nos gusta mucho, que se llama Sayak Valencia, que escribió el capitalismo Gore, ¿no? De la hiperviolencia del borde. Lo utilizo para entenderme a mí mismo, ¿no? Por mi otro borde hiperviolento en el Atlántico. Y me interesa esa cuestión de cuando dice que no hay acceso a los conocimientos, te refieres a acceso a instituciones, ¿no? Como museos y todo, porque estoy seguro que Tijuana está lleno de cultura, pero quizás no la que se considera como cultura con C mayúscula, ¿no? Dentro de las instituciones. Y es algo que nosotros como educadores y como instituciones ahora mismo estamos también repensando, ¿no? De qué conocimiento tiene un valor primordial, ¿no? O central dentro de lo que tenemos que aprender, porque si es aprender los cánones europeos, pues entonces no, pero entonces quizás es que hay que cambiar el enfoque, ¿no? Para parecerse menos a San Diego y parecerse más a Tijuana.
Quizás sí, y estoy totalmente de acuerdo. O sea, hay un quehacer que empuja y sí, hay muchísimo arte y cultura, etcétera, ¿no? Pero, por ejemplo, en Tijuana, en cuestiones de educación básica pública, hay muy pocas escuelas. O sea, todo lo demás, sí hay muchas escuelas que son privadas, ¿no? A eso me refiero. O sea, de las escuelas públicas, universidades públicas en Tijuana, no sé cuántas hay exactamente, pero están el TEC, UABC.
Claro que
Quizá
es parte de esa violencia institucional,
exactamente,
estar cerca del
de
borde,
esa
¿no? Del
estructura,
imperio.
sí. La mayoría de las personas que pueden tener acceso a cruzar a Estados Unidos, pues vienen a estudiar acá, por supuesto. A eso es a lo que me refiero con ese tipo de accesos. Bibliotecas públicas hay pocas y tienen muchos problemas en mantenimientos, etcétera, administración de todo eso.
Sí, lo que sí, o sea, entiendo la segregación social, la segregación que existe en la accesibilidad, ¿no? Inclusive accesibilidad a servicios y cosas así. Pero estoy de acuerdo, ¿no? En el sentido de que la postura, el enmarcamiento de lo que hablamos de la historia, ¿no? O la forma en que hablamos de una historia, hablamos de una historia, de decir, lo que le llamamos como un país en desarrollo, ¿no? Un país en ese sentido, ¿no?
Sí.
Entonces,
Aspirando a llegar a ser
aspirando
así,
a
¿no?
un
Como,
país en desarrollo,
como
¿no?
un imperio,
Imperio.
¿no?
Entonces, en ese sentido, creo que eso es lo que hablamos, que en este contexto, ¿no? A lo mejor la pregunta de que en este contexto de reflexionando de la educación que estamos haciendo, que nosotros debemos de construir esa educación, debemos de construir esos parámetros, esas historias, ¿no? Que en realidad no las han contado y que las otras las tenemos que construir, las tenemos que generar, las tenemos que descubrir, ¿no? Y que en ese sentido creo que es lo que también, a lo mejor la pregunta, ¿no? Que estamos hablando en la currícula, ¿no? En la currícula que ustedes tienen en la escuela, o sea, ¿qué obstáculos hay para obtener ese grado de conocimiento, ¿no? Ese grado de llegar a ese punto.
Y si es posible también, ¿no? Si el conocimiento es moldearse a la educación estandarizada de la arquitectura que nos convierte casi como en monigotes, ¿no? Dentro de un sistema ahí bien homogéneo, o si te permite también encontrarte a ti mismo, ¿no? En tu historia, en tu territorio.
Sorry. I see it as a woman, no? I don't there's been a few times throughout my architecture career where I've felt, I'm like, yes, there's women architects. I want to see more of that. I want to see more theory based on feminist architects. Yesterday at the board ecologies panel, I got to see that. I got to see 3 architect women talking about what they think and how they think we can change. I want to see more of that, and I feel that that's something that there's starting to be a push towards that, but we're still missing like another step. I also see it as a Hispanic. I want to see more reference to Hispanic architecture, to Latinos working in architecture practices today. And yeah.
So Alex, maybe you're missing a little bit of the conversation. So, but we were talking about a little bit that is, what are we missing? What is the history? What is the context we're talking about in this region, right? Did we talk about the history of maybe a developing, right, city, a developing country, a developing kind of thing, more in a very kind of typical way of Western kind of ideology? And the things that we were talking about, what are we missing? In the sense of education, the curriculum, and what we need to construct, right, and then construct this new history that we need to develop. And it's interesting, right, because now you're part of this, right? And you're in this region.
So I think that being a student, mainly on the San Diego side, and then not dealing with the border region before school, and seeing how the education at New School is being now the main institution after Woodbury goes. There's still USC, there's still Southwestern, and I think it's about how do these schools alongside the schools in Tijuana talk about these issues together through TIE. And I think that the access issues that we face on the San Diego side is the access to the conversation, where if I didn't meet the professors I did, if I didn't become close with them, I wouldn't be connected to this side. So I think that access is how do you get the students from the San Diego side to become invested in these issues, to become people who think about it in this way, who become involved, who try to build this social connection to the other side. And I think that we try our best at New School to make these conversations relevant across studio, in and outside of the curriculum, doing things where even in our extracurriculars, I have a club that I founded at New School where we do get to talk about how what we do in studio, how these projects influence on a larger scale, how these connections be built into practice. So I think that for the San Diego side, it's a thing of awareness, of making sure that you have students that aren't directly involved with the border region naturally to become involved with it. And then this extends to other issues that the architect deals with politically. How do we raise the awareness in the student to address these issues, to think about them? We obviously think about it in an extremely local sense into our geography, into our cultural climate. But this thing of how do you get students to be aware of what political
action what issues and ideas to invest themselves in outside of design is one that I think schools can focus on no matter their region.
I think let me go back to maybe here, Cruz. Can you reflect on what you're hearing, right? In the tone, right? In the ideologies these conversations are being placed on. What is how do you see how? I know it's a snip, right? But what it's very difficult, right? But how do you see it, right? Where do you see these comments, and where do you see this region? What is it mirror in the context of the world, in the discussion of the world?
Yeah, I think I'm going back to something you mentioned when you started, that you were there because of liberal arts. And I feel like even in my own experience, first as a student, right, and now as a professor, researcher, whatever, I'm constantly fighting with the universities as an employee, right, as a worker, as a teacher, as somebody that cares about people, and I think like there is this idea that, and I think it's everywhere. I think finally now, because we were in China for like 7 years and then have the chance to come back, and now I'm getting invited to go to different parts of Latin America finally, right? Because I come from Latin America somehow, even if Puerto Rico sometimes is forgotten there in that limbo of its kind of colonial relationship to the US. That there's a lot of aspiration, right? Because of the pressure that empires put on the continent, right? To be an architect is to be such and such. And sometimes I feel like, and don't get me wrong, sounds a bit brash, but I feel like the more oppressed the country by the US, the more professional the schools become. And there's an aspiration of being an architect in the capital A, Le Corbusier type of way. And there's very little space to do what the humanities in those places do, which are, I think, some of the most radical humanities around the world are in Latin America, including Mexico, right? They're in Guatemala, they are in Brazil, they're in El Salvador, right? Like some of the philosophers, the indigenous activists, they are literally in the cutting edge of what the world should be striving to do, right? And we can see it in the indigenous struggles, right? We can see it in the relationship with Palestine. We can see it in many of the other things that are happening around the world. And somehow architecture is so lacking behind somehow, right? We're still looking at the masters, let's look at Kalash, let's look at this and that. And I feel like that's why you don't see feminist discourse that much, right? Because feminist discourse is way ahead. They are leading us. Meanwhile, we are like stuck looking at our tail, somehow. and I think institutionally, I feel like, and that would be also an invitation, is like we need to break away from architecture school somehow. Architecture school is a very toxic space, has been historically. Talking about short histories, architecture school has a kind of short history in this continent, and it's very colonial, right? And I think like the more we are able to like infiltrate and like break it away and erode it, right, and let those humanities, contaminate and make us less architects, the closer we'll be to some sort of justice in a way, right? And it's not all about building stuff, right? There's like tearing down, there's asking questions, there's being very uncomfortable on the spotlight, there's being something that architects are really bad at, and architecture is really bad because it mostly teaches this, is being humble about our limitations, right? We're mostly taught you have to stand there and pretend that you're a professional and you know what you're talking about, even if you actually have no idea what you're talking about, right? Which is pretty much like architecture studio dynamics, pretty much, right? And there needs to be a humbling down of the discipline. And I think, like, of course, students give me hope, but they give me most hope when they are not so happy in school, right? The more happy students become in school, and of course, maybe you're the good students, right? I'm also interested in hearing about the bad students. The ones that are not following the homework and they are like, I'm going to drink. I hate this thing.
We have the bad student. Who is the bad student?
Right. So I like also to think about where are the bad students at and why are they pissed off against this? Because you may find there the friction. Like we work with some indigenous activists in Iowa, and I remember this woman called Shelly Buffalo. She came and she was barefoot, talking to our students, saying like, I don't know why you pay for tuition. We pay for it with our land that was stolen from us. And she said, I used to be a student here in this College of Design, and I left it because it was the whitest thing I ever been in, right? And I felt the pain, because I was a teacher there, and I'm like, I'm trying to like change it slightly, but I don't know if we're managing, right? Because it's such a big institution. And I feel like that was maybe the bad students that we actually need in a way, right? Because they are the ones that see the problem in the institution, right? And it's an invitation to be more discontent with what you're seeing, right? To be shocked, to be upset, like why? And sorry, but there was a panel of all men here before, right?
Yeah.
I was like, oh shit! I thought we have banned those. And I know it's difficult to, because women are busy too, right? Like, matter of fact, I'm sitting here because Emma is here hanging out with the mom, right? So there's a lot of obstacles that we have to come through to even be here, right? So yeah, it's not a shot, but at the same time, I don't think we're doing too much. We're still very stuck. And I hear a lot of promise, but also I'm afraid that if you like architecture school so much, it's for the wrong thing, like what I think is the wrong thing, right? And we should not be trying to be professional. Maybe we should be trying to do something else that is leading us towards the things that we actually care about. If I ask you personally what you care about in life, maybe it's not exactly what architecture is offering to you, right? And I'm more there, in the bad student, good student, I've been all of them, of course, right? And I also have all of them as students too.
No, I really appreciate your point of view, and then that's something that is interesting, because yesterday was like we were talking about. We have a more perspectives of the women, right, and how we are care, right, and the idea of how we're going to do that. And we had a panel, yes, all male, and it's interesting because we had this conversation, saying, well, I'm gonna put Paolo in the spotlight, and said, David, we want to invite Michela. And Michela said, no, Paolo's going to do it because I'm too shy. And that's the problem, right? And that's something we need to talk about. It's suddenly why it's difficult sometimes to have women, right? Have the more voice. And I have to say that Adriana has been very key in also understanding that side and how to understand that. And I have to say that. Kobe, I really appreciate the point of view, right? Because it's telling us also what is we need to reflect. Now, going back to your point in the saying that the students, right? The students are a big factor to them to question, to move the school, to tell us, to really resonate, because maybe we have our own biases. We have very strong, right? Yeah, we're sure. And students need to raise their voice and really tell us, have the voice to really challenge what we're doing. And I think that this is important. This is that's why we need to kind of show you different perspectives, so you can get exposed and kind of reflect. There's no truth in any of it.
It's really interesting because UNAM, you were in UNAM, right? UNAM has a history of activism that is incredible, but maybe it's not architecture school, right? Maybe they're maybe a school that tends to be more aligned with the state interest, right? And with the people that privatize things. That's why the students are protesting, right? So when we say the students, we have to be specific, right? Students are mobilizing, right? I feel like architecture tends to be a discipline that historically attracts a certain class of students. And then if you're not that type of student, they try to shape you into that type of student, because otherwise you're not gonna get a job with your professor, that is this amazing architect that is gonna make you work for free, right?
Or like the show that we just saw in the other room, right? No, I would like to. This is great in the sense that we would like to kind of know, right, more, and then going back to this understanding that. What do you think? What in your opinion, what other opportunities exist for a cross-border notion? What are the opportunities that you think we can exist? I know we can collaborate. I know we can kind of start doing some sort of relationship. I know that we can kind of learn from each other. I know that we can create a little bit more conscience about us. But where do you think there are the opportunities beside that?
Creo que como se mencionó ahorita, algunos de nuestros maestros también se platicaba un poco en el panel de ayer, han tenido la oportunidad, pues, al verse limitados en sus épocas al estudiar arquitectura, al ver no pocas oportunidades de estudio, iban a estudiar a la Ciudad de México y después volvían ellos después a estudiar y de cierta forma, pues, educan con esa idea centralista, ¿no? Entonces, nosotros al estar en la frontera creo que tenemos esa oportunidad de huir un poco, salir de esas ideas y a través de, pues le digo, los paseos que a veces organizan los maestros, que muy pocas veces por cuestiones de permiso, seguridad, y son pocos alumnos los que se animan, que vienen y pueden salir de esas ideas y conocer un poco de un mundo. Tijuana y San Diego, al ser unas ciudades transfronterizas, pues, y tener un aeropuerto internacional, llega gente de todas partes del mundo, así que podemos decir que Tijuana y San Diego son unas ciudades que tienen varias culturas, ¿no? Y entre esas culturas se mezclan con otras culturas y se crea un mundo pues sin fin. Y creo que esa es la oportunidad, ¿no? Tal vez sí tenemos limitaciones, pero también tenemos esas oportunidades para también salir a explorar aquí mismo y pues conocer también nuestras ideas entre nosotros mismos.
Am, Bueno, sí, coincido mucho con lo que dice Karen, ¿no? En algún momento el año pasado, cuando se presentó esto de ATEA, habíamos hecho un comentario, ¿no? Sobre cómo Tijuana no era tan México y San Diego no era tan Estados Unidos, ¿no? Como que se vuelve pues esta región que se queda aislada en realidad de muchas cosas, porque Tijuana está súper alejado de la federación y San Diego, pues cosas próximas como grandes, está Los Ángeles a 2 horas, entonces era como, ni modo, tenemos que convivir acá, ¿no? Y hay un montón de oportunidades, sí, como dice Karen, sobre las cuestiones transculturales, etcétera. Pero también podemos ir observando muchísimas situaciones en un montón de contrastes en microespacios, ¿no? Es decir, igual hay regiones que San Diego pues tiene por ahí escondidas y de pronto la encuentras y tienes estas situaciones, ¿no? Igual, obviamente, Tijuana, y lo vamos viviendo, interactuando de esa manera y vamos creando como otro espacio que reflexiona por sí mismo y habita por sí mismo y es único, ¿no? Incluso es único en sus orografías, en los ecosistemas, ¿no? Todas esas cosas. Incluso la contaminación es diferente a otras ciudades. Sí, lo sé. O sea, por ejemplo, en Ciudad de México te pican los ojos o te duele la garganta por el smog, ¿no? Pero de este lado, pues hay otro tipo de contaminantes, hasta eso, el frío se vive distinto y eso nos moldea de otra manera, ¿no? Algo que pasa importante, por ejemplo, en la escuela libre es que tenemos algunas materias, o sea, como que tiene un pensamiento en el que tienes que hacer una inmersión, ¿no? Entonces tienes que estar siempre activo, practicando, yendo a las visitas de obra cada semana y eso. Y lo que comenta Karen, de que pues como es una clase en la que tenemos que ir y los miércoles hacemos una visita de obra, podemos ver una fábrica, una casa pequeña, una remodelación, y nos ha tocado también venir de este lado a esas situaciones, ¿no? ¿Cómo se está construyendo tal cosa? ¿Cuáles son los sistemas? Y te vas dando cuenta en, en lo difícil que a veces es hacer la transformación, por ejemplo, del sistema métrico que usa Estados Unidos con el sistema internacional y estas cuestiones ahí.
Sí, la situación es de que, o sea, regresando un poquito a la cuestión de la frontera, o sea, la polémica, las polémicas que se generan en una frontera y las diferencias que se generan en este contexto, las desigualdades que se generan en este contexto, las opresiones que se generan en este contexto, esos son elementos que tenemos que empezar a reflexionar y abordarlos más de frente, ¿no? O sea, ¿qué es en ese sentido? Es lo que creo que tenemos una oportunidad para decir qué es el valor que estamos nosotros trabajando, ¿no? En qué momento trabajamos. Me gustaría pararlo un poco ahí porque el tiempo se está haciendo un poquito ya acortando y me gustaría abrirlo al público para que preguntas del público vengan a la conversación. So I'm talking, sorry, anybody who has you're not a student, Blas.
The urge. I know the urge.
You want to be, but you're not.
We all do it. Yeah.
In our heart.
Yes.
Okay. My question is, the border is a large project to fix or mutate into something new? And as people who have been around it longer than some of us who from different places, uh, how can it be broken up into smaller bits and able to take a small step forward and gain some progress?
That question is not for me; it's for them, right?
We can go at night with a pickup and take it down, right?
So, any of you want to kind of answer the question, or Cruz? I don't know anybody.
I can. Oh. Well, see, I don't think the border has to be fixed. I think we just need to learn to collaborate with one another. No, I think in the end, what makes me or any US or any San Diego architecture student different from any other architecture student in the US is that we share a border with Tijuana, and the same with the students of Tijuana. No, I think we have a great opportunity of being able to create either a double degree program or a studio that's collaborative, in which we get to learn from one another. No, there's no necessity for breaking apart. I think it's more of like bringing together.
So, go ahead. Sorry. Somebody else wants.
Yo creo que estoy muy de acuerdo con Kobe. Creo que, como ya dijo, o sea, la idea aquí, obviamente no podemos, por más que quisiéramos nosotros cambiar todas las políticas de nuestro país y romper con la barrera, pues siempre va a estar ahí, al parecer, pero el simple hecho de que esté ahí no significa que eso nos vaya a limitar como nuestras capacidades que tenemos. Y sí, a veces nos volvemos locos en nuestros salones de clases y decimos, ay, no queremos estar aquí, y hay gente que tampoco quiere estar ahí, pero por eso se crean espacios como ATAE, para que nosotros podamos pues aprovechar esta pues conexión y pues interactuar, aprender de otros para crear iniciativas tanto en nuestras escuelas y decir, no me gusta esto, pero ¿qué puedo hacer para cambiarlo? ¿Qué puedo aprender de San Diego University? Y tal vez no empiece con la misma calidad y el mismo presupuesto, pero ahí es donde uno empieza a trabajar como un arquitecto, ¿no? Y saca su lado creativo y con las cosas más baratas que encuentre y pues poco a poco, un poco de fe que se mencionaba en el chalet de ayer, bueno, en el panel, un poco de fe y esfuerzo, pues vas a ir progresando poco a poco, pero no son cambios que se ven de la noche a la mañana, simplemente es un progreso y aportar y empezar con tu granito de arena.
Yo voy a regresar a la pregunta a Cruz, o sea, escuchando lo que comentan ellos, cómo, o sea, ¿qué opinión? En realidad no podemos arreglarlo, no hay un fix, o sí hay un fix. ¿O qué?
I fucking hate the border. So my relationship to my relationship to the US as a colonial subject of it, as a racialized colonial subject, I have nothing to defend about this country really. And every instrument of violence that it installs, like the wall is a racist monument, right? The fears, the rapists, that the violence, the people are gonna take jobs, all the bullshit that the U.S. empire wants to project on the violence it generates, right? Because you can track it all back to the U.S., right? Importing drugs, destabilizing countries across Latin America since its foundation, So it's undeniable. I wouldn't. In the same way that I think all the racist monuments of the South have to come, that's one of the racist monuments of the South. Right? So there's nothing for me to romanticize about it. I would if I could, I will bring it down. I will imagine how it can come down. I think it's possible. Everything that comes up has a way to fall. And I think we should not leave the hope of doing that. Just even if you acknowledge that it's there, you should never play the games of Empire, because that's what Empire wants to make you believe, that it's infallible, that it cannot come down, right? And I think we are witnessing slowly how that violence is crumbling, right, in its own weight, because you cannot uphold violence like this for too long, right? Colonialism has a really short history in our history, right? It's 500 years only out of many, many years we've been here, right? So I would say we need to be creative. Science fiction plays a role in this. Poetry plays a role in this, and imagine, something else. And sometimes it takes ignoring it and pretending that it's not there, even if we're going crazy with bureaucracy, and figuring out ways to be solidary, right? And questioning our own biases that are based on because that monument is there, right? And I think that it takes a lot of effort. but also it's an opportunity for imagination and creativity, right? To think beyond that. For me, the border is such a funny thing too, because you have same people almost, like basically inhabiting one leg on one side and the other leg in the other. We've done some workshops in Chihuahua too, all the water crisis being sent to. It's so like insane to me. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Thank you for bringing me here, because I'm in another part of it, but still like just makes me mad to think about it.
It's good. It's good. I think that well, I will hold my comments for, but I think I would like to open it up more for more questions. Somebody else has a question? Juliana, I think. Blas.
I just want to make one comment to the question of the border will always be here. Another way to imagine how the border doesn't have to be here, another tool we have is history, because history shows us that the border is an aberration. It's a blip. I mean, it is a fairly recent phenomenon. If we think about even the longer history of migration between US and Mexico, it's always been, I mean, for its longest time, it has been a circular migration. So in other words, the idea that you would be trapped on one side of the border or the other is a recent legal police state fiction. So history tells us that it can not only that it can be undone, but it takes tremendous energy to actually keep it up. And that means that it is extraordinarily vulnerable to our political imaginations and our political wills. A question that we ask in the studio every single time we look at the site in San Diego is to ask the students to do a 500-year history of the site rather than a 20-year history of the site. And that instantly puts the border, the idea that there's a Mexico and there's a US and that the two are so separate, makes it a artifact of a very particular circumstance, and therefore a very limited one.
Thank you. You were not a student, Juliana, but it's okay.
It's the urge.
Okay, so somebody else has a question? Blas, you're not a student, but okay. So
We have a slogan in our collective that is all the students are the teacher. So kind of everybody's a student. Everybody's a teacher.
So lately, I've been really questioning about values and how values shape our reality, because they are the lenses that we're looking things through. And I wanted to ask everyone in the panel, or whoever wants to answer, if you could maybe describe what are the values of studying architecture in the context of Tijuana, San Diego, in the schools that you are, and probably what kind of values should be the ones that we'll need to pursue, understanding these asymmetries that we were talking yesterday about, the inequality that we live in Mexico, but then you have a further inequality when it's a binational city as San Diego-Tijuana.
I'm going to hold on to. So anybody, the students, you want to, what do you think? That question. What values do you think?
What values? What values should we pursue in school? I think it's approaching projects with a critical lens, and I think that's something that is essential to architecture education, is not only knowing what a project is about, but how to critically think about it. And I think that looking at the history of the site, the history, the context that it exists in, both in a physical presence but in a historical presence, is important. And I like to go back to a comment that you made earlier about the architect looking back at its tail and talking about Corbusier. I think that we should actually look back and be willing to look back at the history of architecture always, and it should always be relevant, and that we need to look back and see not only how we deal with the issue that we are dealing with at hand, but looking through the historical lens of how other architects have dealt with other issues
for better or for worse with the results. So when looking at something like this and talking about the border, and talking about the wall and how it exists as a physical object, looking and doing something like where students look into what Rem Koolhaas said about the Berlin Wall and how that shaped a thesis of his own and relating that to their own situation. So I think that being able to value a critical lens, understanding history, having a wide variety of research to look into these issues, and understand what social movements in architecture have existed. Because I think that while results of modernism obviously ended the way they did, postmodernism as a thing, that the role to look at these things critically is to pick out why things were done, what could have worked, what didn't work, and to use that as a toolkit when approaching this as a next step. Because when it comes to trying to solve the border, like we can't immediately go, this is how we solve it, but we do attempts. And the thing is that our projects, these moments will become a part of that process where 50, 100 years from now, people go, what were they doing then? They didn't know. But you have to trust that people will be able to critically see the true efforts that we are going down as educators, as students, and looking into these real problems and thinking about solutions, because there are good people throughout history that have been trying to come up with solutions around this thing. And it's about finding what they were trying to do. And I think that that's a critical lens in going through the projects and trusting your teachers and trusting that the projects are to install good values and how to approach these projects.
I think I'm going to intervene there. I think in this, I think you trust your teachers, but also challenge your teachers. So I think it's a critical thing that we don't always we are not the vessels of knowledge. So we need to challenge, and I could tell you first, challenge your challenge them, question them, really rethink about it. What is it that we are being handed on? One more questions. Yes, sorry. Okay, one more question to the public. Somebody else. Here, Blas, you're not. Here's a student here, Blas.
I have questions, but
Okay.
anyone? No, because it was a little about that, about architectural education. And I know that when you feel like representing a school and you're ELA and ENSA and these different schools, and you feel that you have to wave the flag, right? So that was my question a little bit, to be a little more critical. But it was similar to that, but in a more negative way. Meaning, like, instead of asking you for the values that you see, for me, it was more about asking you to think about what is lacking. What do you see lacking? What do you see think that this has to be brought to the foreground in my architectural education? What is it that I'm missing? And I would like to see more of X. I would like to see more of Y. So it was a little bit of that question. And I also had a question. I also had a question for Cruz, which is about education. A statement that you made, Cruz, that I would like to just expand a little bit about how recent history of education has been built around a colonial framework. So I was just curious to hear you expand a little bit on that, right? And those two things.
I think he's going to have a whole lecture about it.
I know.
So
yeah. So maybe, yes, exactly.
So I think.
Question to like segue to the
So,
lecture.
so the next lecture, so I will hold on to that. I'm sure he's going to answer many of those points in there. But you had a question. Yeah, you want to do it? Let's do it. Sorry, I'm going to spend a little.
So you touched on the subject of taking a critical lens in architecture, and Marcela, you just mentioned how as professors, as much as you are professors, you're not necessarily always the vessel of knowledge necessarily. At USD, a very theory focused program. I guess there's a lot of emphasis on learning the history of architecture. I feel like I'm constantly learning about everything that's happened in the past in architecture, and taking that kind of critical lens I've come to find myself often wanting to export all these ideas, all this history that we learn in our classes in my studio, and I've often found myself felt like I'm in shackles or constrained in a way. So I guess my question is, how can we help students utilize and kind of, I guess, expound everything they learn in a liberal arts education and apply it to real life problems, or to how can we better teach students to express everything that we learn? Because I feel like we're soaking in so much information, but yet I feel constrained in my ability to bring it
digest
out.
all that.
Not to digest, but to create from that.
I don't. Yeah, I won't. I don't want to answer that in my own perspective, but I think that there's a way to kind of think about that. That what we are trying to do is expose you, to give you different perspectives and different points of view, right? And I don't want to be the person trying to give an answer in that sense, because then I'm choking the conversation here. But I think that Cruz, in the sense of where that's why I think it's important to have their voice, because they're in a way they're trying to challenge these things, and how the knowledge that you grab, right? And I'm going to go to the knowledge you have, the education you have. Sometimes you feel constrained in shackles, and say, how do you challenge that, right? How do you start criticizing that? And that history helps us to kind of realize, right, and understand different moments that it would not make sense at the beginning or at the first round, but you need to kind of work on it. You need to kind of study it. You need to kind of really develop it in that sense. And I'm going to say that hopefully that we're going to segue to the next presentation, it will give us a little bit of that and tell us different perspectives in that. I'm gonna put it onto you to tell us that.
Intrigue and a lot of expectation, because nobody knows who we are, so they're like, who are these people that we're referring to?
So I'm gonna end there this conversation. I really appreciated your points of view. Of course, this is only a glimpse, only a fraction, and hopefully in the future we continue having these dialogues in the school, in the hallways, going somewhere, that we're always going to kind of have the opportunity to still kind of have these conversations. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time and points.